Butler.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure, although always slightly daunting, to follow my honourable friend, the member for Newbury, but to speak in this debate. And I must start by declaring an interest in that I served as a magistrate for 12 years prior to my election, and also spent almost 5 years as a member of the Youth Justice Board. And it's on the subject of the magistrates and youth courts that I wish to focus my remarks today. The proposals for changes to procedures in the magistrates' courts strike me as sensible and balanced measures that will, in many respects, simply bring them into the 21st century. The new processes and procedures herald a marked improvement to the way courts run, saving time, improving efficiency, and therefore helping to ensure speedier justice. Mr Deputy Speaker, I think it's appropriate to echo the remarks of my honourable friend, the member for Warrington South, in mentioning the tremendous achievements in the magistrates' courts over the past 18 months, because following the inevitable disruption caused at the start of the pandemic, the magistrates' courts were incredibly quick to adapt to new methods in order to prevent delays to justice, with more than 85% of criminal cases falling entirely within the jurisdiction of the magistrates' courts. They are absolutely vital to the overall smooth running of our judicial system. We shouldn't forget that magistrates are volunteers, and I pay tribute to them for all their efforts alongside the staff of HMCTS, the legal representatives and other services such as victim and witness support, the latter also volunteers. The flexibility and adaptability of those working in the magistrates' courts over the past 18 months is a clear demonstration of the capability, the readiness and the willingness of JPs to embrace change. I particularly welcome the digitising and streamlining of preliminary pre-trial court proceedings via the common platform, the removal of unnecessary courtroom hearings and the strengthening of links between the Crown Court and the magistrates' courts. Creating the option for online written pleas will enable defendants to sit with their legal adviser at a time of their own choosing and submit the required information via the common platform. This has to be preferable to waiting in a courthouse for hours on end for a hearing that will likely last just a few minutes. Similarly, I believe that permitting an allocation decision to be made online or in the absence of a defendant in the appropriate circumstances will also enable courts to progress cases and avoid unnecessary delays. This is especially welcome for indictable-only offences, where the appearance in the magistrates' court is simply no more than a formality. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am aware that there are concerns about ensuring that defendants will be properly equipped to make decisions about their cases if they are not physically in a courthouse, and I shared those concerns. So I am therefore very pleased that there will be safeguards to ensure that defendants have the right advice and support, and crucially that a full court hearing will always be available when needed and is considered to be in the interests of justice. And I am grateful to ministers in the Ministry of Justice for reassuring me already that this special care will be paid to particularly vulnerable defendants and to children. The introduction of a new automatic online conviction and standard statutory penalty procedure is a further positive step. It has long struck me as disproportionate for someone to come to court if they have not paid for a rail ticket or fished with an unlicensed rod. An online process that doesn't require the involvement of a magistrate seems to me to be a much more appropriate way of dealing with such cases. Of course, it will be necessary to ensure that it is only those very low-level offences of such a type that take place without direct judicial oversight, and I'm pleased that the addition of any further offences to this mechanism would need to be agreed explicitly by Parliament. The decision to abolish local justice areas further makes good sense. The current system can result in arbitrary borders that present a magistrate sitting in a court just a few miles from their home if it happens to be in a different LJA. The proposals in this bill will mean that work and people can be distributed according to need and availability. And one consequence of that will be the ability for closer working between Crown Court and Magistrates' Court. This greater alignment of different branches of the judicial family is undoubtedly another positive step. However, a few questions do arise from the proposals to scrap LJAs. At present, each area has its own bench chairman, deputies, chair of youth court and so on. These are magistrates who volunteer to take on leadership and pastoral roles. It would be helpful to learn a little more from the Minister about how these functions will be carried out in future, and to have reassurance that magistrates themselves will still have a degree of agency over decisions and practices that affect them directly. We do also know that local areas can see different patterns of crime distinct from one another. Up to now, magistrates' courts have been able to reflect that in their sentencing, so I'm keen to hear from the Minister about how specific local factors will be reflected henceforth. Now, of course, magistrates' courts can only function well when there are enough magistrates to sit in them. The number of those on the bench has fallen dramatically in recent years. I'm pleased that the government is now attempting to recruit more people to the magistracy, but it is important that magistrates represent all walks of life, all ages and all backgrounds. So I wonder if the Minister might tell the House a little about how he hopes this might be achieved in the years ahead. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are relatively few clauses in this bill affecting the youth court. There are provisions regarding the transfer of cases when a young person reaches the age of 18. But I'd like to take this opportunity to repeat to my honourable friend and his colleagues in the department my call for young people to be dealt with by the courts according to the age at which they committed their offence, rather than the age at which they first appear in court, which is the process at present. Now, I was pleased to introduce a 10-minute rule bill on this subject last February that had support from across this House, including from very learned and distinguished members. As I said then, this would be a relatively simple change to make in legislation, because in many respects it does no more than correct an anomaly. But for those affected, its effect would be profound because of the different sentencing options that are uniquely available in the youth jurisdiction. Such a change would enable young people to put their mistakes behind them and make a constructive contribution to our society. It would put more emphasis on preventing reoffending, which is key to reducing the number of victims of crime, something we all wish to see. Now, while the number of these cases might not be high, they do have a massive impact on the young people concerned. Only this week, I've heard of a case of a boy who was arrested at 16. He is still waiting for his first court appearance 3.5 years later, when he is nearly 20. That cannot be right. So I hope that as today's bill progresses through Parliament, ministers will consider whether this could be the appropriate time and place to bring about a change that is supported throughout the justice system. Mr Deputy Speaker, much of the debate today has focused on measures in this bill relating to judicial review. They are certainly very important, but we should not overlook the other positive steps being taken to improve our justice system. And I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to highlight this government's strong and sensible changes to magistrates' courts proceedings that I am confident will bring benefits to defendants, witnesses, lawyers, court staffs and magistrates themselves, as well as to victims of crime. And that's why I'm pleased to be supporting this bill tonight.